The story begins with a popular virtual reality game called the Newgate. But it suddenly becomes deadly when players can't log out, and dying in the game means dying in real life. The only way to escape is by beating the game. We meet Shin, who is determined to make it to the end. We see Shin ready to challenge the final boss of the game while his NPCs tell him to be careful. He starts fighting with the boss and manages to cut off its wing, but it regenerates. He decides to attack faster and manages to get its HP low. It tries to regenerate again, but he delivers the finishing blow. Shin gains several titles, and the game system announces that the final boss has been defeated, so players can finally log out. He checks his scroll to see the players leaving the game until he's the last one left. He prepares to leave, but a gate suddenly opens, confusing him since the boss was supposed to be the last event of the game. He wakes up in a field outside and wonders what happened. It seems too real to be a game, so he checks his window and realizes his stats have increased thanks to the titles he received after defeating the boss. He tries to log out again but can't find the option. He attempts to see if anyone is online but has no network connection, wondering how he's playing without internet. Shin uses an item to find his way home, but on the way, he sees a city that wasn't there before. He sees his house but notices a girl in need of help as some guys drag her out of a barrier. A monster suddenly appears, so they run away, but Shin manages to save the girl. They go inside the house, and the girl introduces herself as Tiara, thanking him for saving her. She thinks he's a friend of her master, but Shin doesn't know who she's talking about. Tiara mentions that everyone knows Shei from the Moon Sanctum, and he becomes surprised because Shei is one of his support characters. Shin notices she's suspicious, so he explains that they're old friends and asks where Shei is. Tiara doesn't want to tell him because he's a stranger, but she can deliver a message to Shei, saying it costs 1,000 jewels. Shin shows a coin and explains he only has one gale. Tiara wonders if he used an item box because only kings can use one, and she's also surprised by the gale coin because one of them is worth 10 billion jewels. She says they can be enchanted, but he notes that in the game, one gale was the smallest amount of money. Tiara wonders who he is, so Shin explains he's a high human. He discovers that only 6 high humans existed in the world and they disappeared 500 years ago during the dusk of prosperity. Shin is confused, and she wonders how he doesn't know about this historical event where many people disappeared. He thinks she's talking about the mass logout and realizes that thousands of people logging out at the same time became a major incident. He realizes he's been sent 500 years into the future of the game. Shin thanks her for teaching him this and offers a gale as a token of gratitude. She's happy to have one. Shin thinks it will be useful to her since elves are good at magic, but she wonders how he knows she's an elf because Shei put an illusion spell on her. Shin wonders why, so she reveals that elves with black hair are a bad omen. She was expelled from her village for always being attacked by monsters, so Shei changed her appearance and brought her to the shop where she can stay safe thanks to the barrier. She has been living like this for the last 100 years. Shin realizes why the boar appeared and mentions her hair was silver before. He decides to analyze her and discovers she has a curse that manifests randomly. He knows how to undo it and uses purification on her, but he's disappointed that only part of her hair returned to normal. She can't believe it and gets emotional. They try to leave the barrier but aren't attacked, so she cries tears of joy. Back at the Moon Sanctuary, Tiara explains that Shei will take a while to return, so Shin decides to visit the city to learn more about this world. She has something to help him enter the city and shows a letter of recommendation, saying he can use it to pass through the town's checkpoint. He thinks it's too much, but she wanted to thank him even more. She promises to let him know when Shei returns, so Shin thanks her before leaving. He enters the city of Bari, and the guard explains that the letter of recommendation is a big deal because it works in other kingdoms, and he can even get an audience with the king. The guard takes Shin to the Adventurers Guild, where he tries to register as an adventurer, but the receptionist explains that registrations happen on the first floor. He goes to the first floor and thinks the receptionist looks a lot like the last one, so she explains that the last one is her twin sister Celica, and she's Celia. He waits for his adventurer card, and Celica appears with something to eat. He starts eating, but she keeps staring at him, so he wonders what happened. She wants to verify his letter of recommendation, and Shin finds out that the guild master is right behind him. They decide to talk, and the man introduces himself as Barlu. He places another letter of recommendation next to Shin's, and Barlu sees that they resonate, so he knows it's genuine. He explains that letters of recommendation are valuable as they're the most reliable form of identification and grant access to many places, so many people try to steal them. It would be a disaster if it fell into the wrong hands, so he asks him to destroy it if he can't protect it. Shin assures him that he'll be fine and can't do that after Tiara trusted him with it. Barlu is glad to hear this and thinks they will get along well since they're both men recognized by the sanctuary. The next day, Shin goes to get his adventurer card, and Celica sees that he's wearing new clothes while he thinks his other outfit was too flashy for a low-class adventurer. She gives him the guild card and explains that there are 9 ranks starting from G, and he can go up to a double S rank by completing missions, but he can only accept jobs 2 ranks higher than his. Shin takes on an herb collecting mission and says goodbye to her while Celica thinks about how he seems different from the others. We see Shin frustrated in the forest because he has been searching for hours and remembers that in the game, this mission was for beginners. He suddenly notices an enemy on the radar, so he goes to see and discovers that it's a skull-faced Jack with a level of 359. He finds a broken carriage and can't ignore it, so he decides to attack. He wonders why an undead is holding a light sword and thinks it's a unique monster. He attacks it again, but it doesn't seem effective, and his sword is already damaged. He has no other choice and unlocks his limit. He charges again, but this time he eliminates the monster with 1 strike. The sword flies away, and he regrets it because he wanted it. The monster drops a gemstone, so he decides to accept it as the sword lands in the castle, and the guards are confused about what happened. They wonder what to do, so the second Princess Ryan asks them to call an appraiser to analyze the sword and investigate who threw it into the castle, thinking he must be strong. Shin walks through the city and sees injured soldiers. The guard explains that a squad of 12 was attacked by the Skullface, but only 4 returned. Shin realizes that the carriage belonged to them. The guard also mentions the sword thrown into the castle, so Shin feels guilty for the trouble. He returns to the guild, and Celica notices that the adventurers gathered to defeat the Skullface, but Shin reveals that he already killed it and shows the gem it dropped, leaving her in disbelief. She shouts that one person is not enough to defeat a Skullface but turns red for getting too close. Celica's co-worker Alice suddenly appears, and Celica tells her that Shin defeated the Skullface Jack. He explains that he has no proof because the equipment from the Skullface isn't much, so he didn't bring it with him. Alice finds it strange since even rank B equipment can be worth a small fortune. She asks Celica to analyze the gemstone since it should contain the Skullface mana. Shin wonders about the frequency of Skullfaces, and Alice explains that many people lose their lives in the northern forests due to the monsters, so the ranks of the dead can merge with mana, creating the perfect environment for undead creation. But the forest doesn't have much mana, so there shouldn't be a powerful undead. Shin realizes it was an exception and reveals that its level was 359, which shocks both of them. Celica runs to analyze the stone, and Alice explains that if this is true, he's stronger than a rank A group. But he asks her to keep it a secret since he doesn't want to draw attention. Shin goes to the restaurant, and while he waits, Celia explains that someone will share the table with him since they're full. A man suddenly appears with a legendary spear called Venom and sits next to him. He introduces himself as Avis and assumes Shin is a new adventurer but notices he's above average. Shin explains that it's his 3rd day and he doesn't know much because he's from the countryside. Avis realizes that's why he isn't afraid of him and mentions that they call him a vampire because he hunts many undead. Shin wonders if it's because he's pale, which makes everyone nervous, but Avis laughs and reveals that the real reason is his spear because it can drain life. Celia brings the food, so they enjoy their meal together. Shin later goes to the library to research the decline of glory 500 years ago, but there aren't many records about it. Meanwhile, Barlu is in a meeting to talk about the Skullface. They wonder who would defeat a Jack and not collect its armor while Alice explains that he didn't find it impressive. The old man thinks those with letters of recommendation are strange, and they mention that on the day the Skullface was defeated, the sword was thrown into the castle, so they wonder if the events are related. Barlu wonders what the sword looked like, so the night Aldi reveals that the blade was 2 m long, made of magical steel, and enchanted with the element of light, so it's as powerful as the national treasure. Barlu is surprised it's a legendary great weapon, and Aldi thinks he can't ignore someone who defeated a monster with that sword. Shin eats a skewer in the square and notices a girl staring at him, so he offers her food and notices she doesn't look like a beggar. The girl is a tiger type, and she introduces herself as Millie, thanking him for the food. Ava suddenly appears and explains that Millie is an orphan from the church, so he always has to get her when she runs away. He decides to go home, but Millie goes up to Shin and whispers in his ear before leaving. At night, Shin wonders why Millie asked him to rescue a fox in the forest. He thinks it might be a good pastime until Shei returns but realizes he forgot to leave his message for Tiara. So he goes to the moon sanctuary and asks Tiara to show Shei his sword when she sees her. He mentions that it can only be used by him and Shei or someone designated by them. She realizes it's a powerful ancient weapon and she's actually scared of it. Shin thinks it must be because of its materials and mentions the monsters he defeated to create it, but Tiara wonders why he keeps talking about legendary monsters. He asks her to keep it safe anyway and gives her letters to keep in touch, explaining that they will be able to reach him no matter where he is because she just has to write the person's name and say send. But Tiara wonders why he doesn't send it directly to Shei, so he explains that he tried but kept failing. He tries using it with her, and she receives the letter, so it's working. Shin figures it's because he hasn't met Shei in this new world yet. Tiara asks for more letters because she wants to be a mage and study the item. He thinks it's okay, so he gives her more before leaving. Shin goes to the northern forest to look for the fox and keeps walking until he finds a shrine. He continues but suddenly feels something. He finds a small fox inside the building and notices that it has a poison effect and is also cursed. He quickly cures it, but this revives an army of the undead, so he summons his spear and starts eliminating the skeletons. He kills all of them, but the statues begin to break, and 2 demons come out of them. He has never seen these monsters before, and they're level 600 and 574. They attack him, but he dodges and uses a skill called shadow binding. But they release a curtain to escape. He can't see anything, but the wolves keep attacking him. The fox suddenly shows him something, and he realizes it's the magic circle where it was, and the mist doesn't enter there, so he can use his skills. The wolves charge at him, but he uses his binding bow, eliminating them with 1 strike. The mist clears, and the fox jumps into his arms. He wonders what race it is and discovers it's an elemental, one of the strongest monsters in the game. He has never heard of a baby version but asks if it wants to go with him, so it jumps onto his head. He notices it understands him and also realizes that some things are different from the game. Meanwhile, Shei receives Tiara's letter, wondering how she has this magical item and is surprised to learn about her master. Shin thinks it's better to hide the elemental from the guild, so he suggests making a pact with it. He explains that it's like a partnership between a tamer and a monster, and it hides the monster's level and species so they can be together all the time. The fox seems excited, so he creates the pact, and a symbol appears on both of them. He also names her Yuzuha, and she seems to like it. He suddenly gets a message from Tiara because she managed to talk to Shei, and she's waiting for a response. He's happy with the news and decides to go to the guild. He reports the army of the undead he found in the forest and looks for a job. He notices a mission at the orphanage near the church and thinks it must be a special request since it has no rank. He also remembers that Millie lives there, so he decides to visit her and takes the job. He arrives at the church where a woman named Tria greets him. She asks if he came for the job, so he confirms this and also mentions Millie. They go to a room where he meets Millie, who gets excited and hugs him. Tria notices he's not a bad person and it's been a long time since Millie got attached to someone like that. Shin asks Millie if this is the fox she mentioned, so she confirms and thanks him. He explains to Yuzuha that he could only rescue her because of Millie, so she thanks her. He turns to Tria and asks about the request, so she mentions it's about a skill successor. Shin realizes that apparently few people have skills now. She explains that she's looking for a skill for him to teach and she wonders if it involves healing or poisoning, but she reveals it's purification. She knows it's hard to find but gets surprised by Shin's reaction and learns that he can teach it. But Shin has a condition, saying he wants to know about Millie's powers and also wants her to share any information from the church because he needs to learn more about the world. She seems hesitant, but Millie explains that Shin isn't a problem, so she accepts his terms. Tria talks about Millie's powers and reveals that she has the title of star composer, so she has unexpected visions that never fail. Shin notes that it's a powerful ability and mentions that many would want to take advantage of it, but she assures him that she told everyone to be discreet about it. She tells him that an adventurer helps the orphanage because he used to be an orphan, and Shin realizes she's talking about Avis as she explains that everyone is afraid of him so the kids are safe. Shin is ready to teach the skill, but she explains that she's not the one who's going to be learning the skill. She wants the granddaughter of the former priest to learn it since things would be easier if she inherited the church later on. Yuzuha plays with the other orphans, and Shin feels lonely because she's stealing all the attention. He wonders if Millie doesn't want to play with Yuzuha, but she thinks she can't compete with the older kids. But Yuzuha suddenly goes to his head, and Millie gets a chance to have her all to herself, so Shin realizes her plan was to be close to him. A nun suddenly appears and asks if he's the one who will save them, but he wonders what she means. She looks sad and reveals that they're about to close the orphanage, explaining that the church doesn't have a priest at the moment, so someone has to take over. He wonders why Tria doesn't do it, but she explains that it needs to be someone with a specific skill, and the person sent to take over the church wants to get rid of the orphanage. The granddaughter of the former priest has the right to inherit the church, but she still needs to have this skill. Shin realizes why Tria needs him but wonders why the priest wants to get rid of the orphanage, so she mentions that it's because he only cares about money. Later on, Tria calls for Shin and sees him with the other children. She introduces him to the granddaughter of the former priest, who introduces herself as Rashia but bites her tongue while Tria explains that she can be clumsy but is hardworking. They start talking, but Avis suddenly appears to find out who accepted the job and discovers it was Shin. He asks Shin about his intentions, but Millie reassures him, so he realizes she saw something and decided to trust Shin. He asks about the skill, so Shin explains that Rashia can get it after defeating 200 undead creatures that are over level 150 while holding a sacred orb. They're shocked to hear this, but he assures them that he can weaken the monsters for her to land the final blow, and he also has the orb, so it won't be that difficult. Rashia is speechless but she promises to do her best, so Avis decides to go with them because he realizes that Shin isn't a normal person, thinking there's only one explanation. Avis calls Shin for a drink and asks him if he's a chosen one, someone who has a title or knowledge that he shouldn't have. Shin asks if it's like memories of a past life, but Avis explains that it's information about items and monsters, so Shin doesn't think he's a chosen one. Shin notices that Avis is caring and thinks he's a hero who protects the orphanage. Avis pretends it's because he gets annoyed by the kids crying, so Shin smiles at how bad a liar he is. He sees a message from Tiara mentioning that Shay said she'd come back soon, and Tiara is surprised by how much she asked about him. He suddenly gets another notification, so he checks it, and his letter of recommendation appears. Avis is surprised to see it and reveals that he has one too, so Shin can't believe it, realizing that they have something in common. The next day, the trio goes to the ghost plains where they encounter the undead. Shin traps them with his barrier while Avis breaks their legs to immobilize them, and Rashia finishes them off using healing magic, which damages the undead. They do this until they reach a barrier which contains higher-level monsters. Avis uses his adventurer card to enter, and they keep weakening monsters so that Rashia can land the final hit. Shin explains that she'll be at level 150 when she learns purification. On the other side of the ghost plains, Ryan defeats a skull-faced Jack and is impressed with how much easier it is to beat them with her new sword. The knight is worried about the other group, but Shay offers to handle it. The group is desperate, and she arrives at the last minute, but that's where this video ends. Remember to like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.